The marble floors of the Whitmore mansion gleamed like polished bones under the harsh LED lighting, reflecting Maria Santos's distorted image as she pushed her cleaning cart through the hallway. Each footstep echoed in the sterile silence, a metronome marking time in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The air hung thick with the scent of imported orchids and expensive leather, but underneath it all lurked something else, something that made Maria's skin crawl every time she entered this place. Jonathan Whitmore's voice boomed from his office, cutting through the artificial serenity like a blade. No, no, and no. I don't care what her agent says. If she wants representation from the Whitmore agency, she follows MY rules. Period. Maria paused outside the mahogany door, her hand gripping the mop handle tighter. Through the crack, she could see him pacing behind his massive desk, his 6-foot frame casting long shadows across walls lined with headshots of young women, all beautiful, all desperate, all trusting. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his designer suit impeccable, but his eyes held a predatory gleam that Maria had learned to recognize in men who believed the world owed them everything. Listen, sweetheart, Whitmore continued into his phone, his tone shifting to what he probably considered charming. You want to make it in this town. You play by my rules. That means the photo shoot, that means the audition, and that means you keep your pretty little mouth shut about anything that happens in my house. Are we clear? Maria forced herself to keep moving, her cart wheels squeaking softly against the marble. She'd worked for Whitmore for 6 months now, 3 days a week, always during his business hours when he held court from his Beverly Hills fortress. The pay was better than her other cleaning jobs, suspiciously better, but Maria needed every dollar she could scrape together. Sophia's school fees, her mother's medical bills back in Guadalajara, the lawyer fighting her custody battle, the money was everything, even if it came from the devil himself. Maria. Maria. Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. She stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Si, Senor Whitmore." He appeared in his doorway, his bulk filling the frame. His face was flushed with the particular shade of red that came from too much cocaine and too much power. "How many times do I have to tell you? English. Only. In my house. You're in America now, sweetheart. Act like it." "Yes, sir." "Sorry, sir." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "That's better." His eyes raked over her with the casual entitlement of a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Now, I'm having some very important clients over tonight. VIPs. The kind of people who appreciate discretion. You understand?" Maria nodded, keeping her expression carefully blank. She'd learned to make herself invisible around men like Whitmore, to become nothing more than wallpaper with arms. It was a survival skill she'd perfected during her 3 years of hiding in Los Angeles's shadows. "Good girl." The condescension dripped from his voice like honey laced with poison. "I want this place spotless. And I mean spotless. If I find so much as a speck of dust, you'll be looking for a new job. And we both know how hard it would be for someone like you to find work without proper documentation." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but crystal clear. Maria had never told him about her immigration status, but men like Whitmore had a nose for vulnerability. They could smell desperation the way sharks smelled blood in the water. "I understand, sir." "Excellent." "Oh, and Maria?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic scent of sweat and corruption. "Stay out of the East Wing tonight. That area is strictly off limits. The red door at the end of the hall, consider it forbidden territory. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Good. Because curiosity killed the cat, as they say. And in your position, you really can't afford to be curious about anything, can you? Maria shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. But even as she submitted to his intimidation, her photographer's eye was cataloging details. The way his left hand trembled slightly, cocaine or guilt, she wondered. The fresh scratches on his expensive watch, suggesting a recent struggle. The faint chemical smell that clung to his clothes, something beyond his usual cologne. That's what I like about you, Maria. You know your place. Whitmore turned back toward his office, then paused. Oh, and clean around the cameras today. I've had new security equipment installed. State-of-the-art stuff. It records everything, and I do mean everything, that happens in this house. So if anything goes missing, if anything gets damaged. He let the threat linger. Well, let's just say there will be consequences. As his office door slammed shut, Maria stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by the oppressive weight of his words. The house felt different now, more sinister. Those barely visible red lights she'd noticed tucked behind mirrors and paintings, they weren't just decoration. They were eyes. Watching. Recording. Judging. She thought of Sophia, 8 years old and waiting for her at their cramped apartment in East LA. Thought of her mother, lying in a hospital bed in Guadalajara, too proud to ask for help but too sick to refuse it. Thought of Carlos, her brother, whose investigative journalism had gotten him killed when he'd gotten too close to the truth about men just like Whitmore. The forbidden room called to her like a siren song, but Maria forced herself to look away. She had bills to pay, a daughter to protect, and secrets of her own to keep. Whatever horrors lay behind that red door would have to wait. For now. But as she began her methodical cleaning routine, Maria's trained eye continued cataloging every detail, every shadow, every inconsistency in Whitmore's perfect facade. She might be invisible to him, just another disposable woman in his collection of the desperate and discarded, but invisibility could be its own kind of power. The predator thought he was hunting. He had no idea he was already caught in a web of his own making. 3 months earlier the fluorescent lights of the East LA Community Center buzzed like angry wasps as Maria sat in the hard plastic chair, her daughter Sophia coloring quietly beside her. The immigration lawyer, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Delgado, shuffled through a stack of papers that seemed to grow thicker with each passing week. "I won't lie to you, Maria," Patricia said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your case is complicated. Without proper documentation, and with your ex-boyfriend threatening to report you to ICE." She paused, studying Maria's face. "We need something big. Something that proves you're not just hiding, but actively contributing to the community. Helping law enforcement, maybe. Something that makes you valuable enough to protect." Maria's hand instinctively went to the small digital camera hidden in her purse, the last gift from her brother Carlos before the cartel had silenced him forever. What kind of help? Information. Evidence. The kind of thing that puts bad people away. Patricia leaned forward. "Look, I've seen your background. Photography degree, journalistic training. Your brother was Carlos Santos, right? The reporter who was investigating trafficking networks." The mention of Carlos sent a familiar spike of pain through Maria's chest. "Yes. Then you understand how these operations work. They rely on invisibility, on people being too scared to speak up." Patricia's eyes held a knowing glint. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let them think they're hunting. That conversation had planted the seed, but it was Detective Carmen Rodriguez who had watered it into something real. Maria had approached the LAPD detective after weeks of research, armed with nothing but suspicion and a desperate need for justice that extended far beyond her own situation. "Whitmore's been on our radar for years," Detective Rodriguez had explained during their first clandestine meeting in a 24-hour diner in downtown LA. "But he's smart. Insulated. Uses shell companies, offshore accounts, layers of legal protection. We know he's running something, but proving it." She shook her head in frustration. What if someone could get inside? Maria had asked. Someone invisible. Someone he wouldn't see as a threat. "You mean someone like a domestic worker?" Rodriguez's eyes had sharpened with interest. "That's dangerous, Maria. These people don't just exploit, they kill to protect their operations. They already killed my brother." The two women had stared at each other across the vinyl booth, understanding passing between them like an electric current. Rodriguez's missing sister Elena. Maria's murdered brother Carlos. Two women bound by loss, united by a hunger for justice that transcended personal safety. Present day now, 3 months into her carefully constructed infiltration, Maria moved through Whitmore's mansion with the practiced invisibility of a woman who had learned to survive by being overlooked. Her cleaning cart was equipped with more than just supplies, hidden cameras disguised as air fresheners, recording devices tucked inside spray bottles, a sophisticated wireless transmitter that looked like a broken radio that didn't work anymore. Every surface she cleaned revealed another piece of the puzzle. Financial documents carelessly left on desks. Phone conversations overheard through thin walls. Email addresses scribbled on napkins and tossed in wastebaskets. For 3 months, she had been a ghost in his machine, cataloging every detail of an operation that stretched from the mansions of Beverly Hills to the desperate streets of East LA and beyond. The pattern had emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. Young women, always vulnerable, always desperate. Aspiring actresses who came for auditions that turned into something far more sinister. Models promised portfolio shoots that became blackmail material. Immigrants like herself, threatened with deportation unless they complied with increasingly degrading demands. Maria's camera had captured it all. License plates of luxury cars arriving at odd hours. Faces of men in expensive suits who looked like they'd stepped out of boardrooms and country clubs. The comings and goings of women who entered Whitmore's house confident and left broken, their eyes holding the hollow look of the newly traumatized. But the forbidden room, that red door in the east wing, remained tantalizingly out of reach. Whitmore's inner sanctum, protected by electronic locks and his paranoid obsession with control. Whatever secrets lay behind that door, they were the key to everything. "Maria, you need to see this." Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled through the tiny earpiece hidden beneath Maria's hair as she dusted the hallway outside Whitmore's office. The detective was monitoring from a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, watching the feeds from Maria's hidden cameras in real time. Through the partially open office door, Maria could see Whitmore hunched over his computer, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. He was reviewing something, his expression one of proprietary satisfaction that made Maria's skin crawl. "I'm uploading tonight's selection," Whitmore was saying into his Bluetooth headset. "Fresh merchandise, just like you requested. The young one from the valley, blonde, 19, thinks she's going to be the next Jennifer Lawrence." His laugh was the sound of broken glass. "By the time I'm done with her, she'll be grateful for whatever scraps I throw her way." Maria's hand tightened on her dust cloth as she continued her careful surveillance. Through her hidden camera, she could see what was on his screen, a catalog of women displayed like products, complete with measurements, personal information, and what looked like a rating system based on their level of desperation and compliance. The auction starts at 8, Whitmore continued. Usual rules apply. No permanent damage, no public exposure without my approval, and payment in cryptocurrency only. Oh, and gentlemen. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow made it more menacing. This batch is special. Several of them are, shall we say, documentation challenged. Which means they'll be particularly motivated to please. Maria felt sick, but forced herself to keep moving, to keep recording. This was it, the evidence they needed. But even as triumph surged through her, she knew they were running out of time. The women Whitmore was selling would be delivered tonight. By tomorrow, they could be scattered across the country, lost in a network of exploitation that stretched far beyond Los Angeles. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. We need access to that room. Whatever it takes. Maria stared at the forbidden door at the end of the hallway, its red paint gleaming like spilled blood under the harsh lighting. Electronic lock, keypad entry, probably alarm systems. Getting inside would require either Whitmore's access code or a level of technical skill she didn't possess. Unless. She thought about Whitmore's arrogance, his absolute certainty that he was untouchable. Men like him always had a weakness, usually their own ego. He documented everything because he needed to feel in control, needed to have evidence of his power over others. But that same compulsion could be turned against him. As she worked, Maria's photographer's eye continued cataloging details. The way Whitmore's fingers moved across the keypad, muscle memory creating a pattern even when he thought no one was watching. The angle of the security camera that covered the door, positioned to catch intruders, but creating a blind spot near the wall. The delivery schedule she'd memorized from overhearing his phone calls. Tonight's merchandise would arrive at 7, giving her a narrow window when his attention would be focused elsewhere. Carmen, she whispered into her hidden microphone as she moved to the far end of the hallway. I think I have a way in. Maria, no. It's too dangerous. We can work with what we have isn't enough. Maria's voice was steady, but inside, her heart was racing. He's moving the operation tonight. After tomorrow, these women disappear. We need what's in that room. The detective's silence stretched across the radio waves, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Finally, what do you need? A distraction. Something big enough to get him away from his cameras for at least 10 minutes. And if you get caught? Maria thought of Sophia, asleep in their cramped apartment, trusting her mother to come home. Thought of Elena Rodriguez, missing for 10 years and possibly just a room away. Thought of Carlos, who had died trying to expose the very network she was now infiltrating. Then you make sure the evidence gets out anyway. As Maria continued her careful work, the forbidden room waited at the end of the hallway like a cancer in the heart of Whitmore's operation. Whatever horrors lay behind that red door would soon see the light, whether she survived to witness it or not. The trap was set. The bait was in place. Now all that remained was the spring. The grandfather clock in Whitmore's foyer chimed 7 times, each note reverberating through the mansion like a death knell. Maria positioned herself in the kitchen, ostensibly polishing the already pristine granite countertops while watching the driveway through the window. Right on schedule, a black Mercedes with tinted windows pulled through the wrought iron gates. They're here, she whispered into her hidden microphone. Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled back through her earpiece. Remember, you have maybe 10 minutes once he goes downstairs to the entertainment room. The moment those girls arrive, his attention will be completely focused on the presentation. Maria's stomach churned as she watched Whitmore emerge from his office, straightening his tie with the satisfied air of a man about to close a profitable deal. He'd changed into an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maria made in 3 months. His hair was freshly styled, his cologne thick enough to choke on from across the room. "Maria." His voice boomed through the house. "Come here. Now." She abandoned her cloth and hurried to the foyer, keeping her eyes respectfully downcast. Through the tall windows, she could see 3 young women being escorted from the Mercedes by 2 men in suits who moved with the casual menace of professional muscle. The women looked exactly as she'd expected, young, beautiful, and terrified despite their attempts to appear confident. "Listen carefully," Whitmore said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm having a very important business meeting downstairs. You are to stay on this floor and complete your cleaning duties. You are not, under any circumstances, to go near the entertainment level or the East Wing. Are we absolutely clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He studied her face with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Because if I find you anywhere near my private business, if I even suspect you've been listening to conversations that don't concern you." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the cold intelligence behind his eyes. "Well, let's just say that immigration officials can be very efficient when they receive anonymous tips about undocumented workers." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Maria nodded, her hands trembling just enough to sell the performance of a terrified domestic worker. "I understand, Senor, sir. I understand, sir." "Excellent." Whitmore's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, and Maria. If anyone calls or comes to the door, you tell them I'm not available. No exceptions. No matter who they are." He turned and strode toward the elevator that led to the basement entertainment level, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble like rifle shots. Maria waited until the elevator doors closed before allowing herself to breathe again. "He's gone," she reported quietly. "Copy that. I'm moving into position with backup units. You have 8 minutes before I trigger the distraction." Maria moved swiftly through the house, her cleaning cart abandoned in favor of speed and stealth. The forbidden door waited at the end of the East Wing hallway, its red surface gleaming like fresh blood under the track lighting. She'd memorized the keypad sequence from weeks of careful observation, Whitmore's birthday followed by the digits of his social security number. His arrogance was so complete that he'd never considered the possibility of someone watching, learning, preparing. The lock disengaged with a soft electronic beep that seemed to echo like thunder in the empty hallway. Maria's hand trembled as she turned the handle, her photographer's instincts warring with basic human horror at what she might find inside. The room beyond was a monument to systematic exploitation. Filing cabinets lined every wall, each one meticulously labeled with dates, names, and coded categories that made Maria's blood run cold. A professional-grade computer setup dominated one corner, multiple monitors displaying what looked like a live auction interface. But it was the wall of photographs that stopped her dead in her tracks. Hundreds of images, all professionally shot, all documenting moments of vulnerability and degradation. Maria recognized many of the faces from missing person reports she'd researched, young women who'd come to Los Angeles with dreams and disappeared into Whitmore's network of exploitation. But it was the section devoted to surveillance photography that made her legs nearly give out. There she was. Dozens of images of herself, taken without her knowledge over the past 6 months. Changing clothes in what she thought was the privacy of the guest bathroom. Sleeping in her car during breaks between jobs. Bending over to clean, the camera angle deliberately chosen to be as degrading as possible. Each photo was time-stamped and annotated with clinical observations about her routine, her vulnerabilities, her potential market value. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez's voice whispered through the earpiece. "Maria, get out of there. Now." But Maria was transfixed, her photographer's eye cataloging the scale of the operation despite her revulsion. Financial records showing millions in cryptocurrency transactions. Shipping manifests for human cargo disguised as legitimate business. Client lists that read like a who's who of Hollywood, politics, and high society. And then she saw it. A file cabinet marked Archive, Inactive Assets. Inside, a thick folder labeled Rodriguez, Elena, Guadalajara University faculty. Her hands shook as she opened the file. Elena Rodriguez, Detective Rodriguez's missing sister, stared back at her from a professional headshot that had probably been taken for a university directory. But the subsequent photos told a different story, the systematic documentation of a woman being broken down, piece by piece, until the confident academic had been replaced by a hollow-eyed shell. The file was thick, detailed, and recent. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just missing. She was alive, and she was still part of Whitmore's inventory. "Maria, you need to get out now." Rodriguez's voice was sharp with panic. "Something's wrong. The basement room is empty, they're not down there." The sound of footsteps in the hallway froze Maria's blood. Heavy, deliberate, moving with the confident stride of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Whitmore's voice drifted through the walls, casual and conversational. "Yes, I know it's earlier than scheduled, but sometimes you have to adapt. Bring them to the archive room, I want to show them the full catalog before we proceed with tonight's selection." The archive room. This room. He was coming here. Maria's mind raced through possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. The window was barred. The door was the only exit, and Whitmore was already in the hallway. She could hide behind the filing cabinets, but the room was too small to provide real concealment. "Detective," she whispered urgently. "I need that distraction now. 60 seconds out. Can you stall?" "I don't think." The door swung open, and Jonathan Whitmore stepped into the room, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and finally settling on a cold satisfaction that was somehow worse than anger. Behind him stood two of his security men and the three young women from the Mercedes, their eyes wide with shock at the gallery of exploitation surrounding them. "Well, Whitmore said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a man who had just discovered his greatest suspicions confirmed. "Maria Santos. Or should I say, sister of Carlos Santos, the late investigative journalist who got a little too curious about things that didn't concern him." Maria's blood turned to ice. He knew. Somehow, he'd known all along. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you?" Whitmore stepped further into the room, his bulk blocking any chance of escape. "The resemblance to your dear departed brother is quite striking. Same eyes, same stubborn chin, same suicidal tendency to stick your nose where it doesn't belong." One of the young women, a blonde who couldn't have been older than 19, let out a choked sob. "What is this place? What are those pictures?" "Shut up," one of the security men barked, but Whitmore raised a hand. "No, let her see. Let them all see." His smile was the stuff of nightmares. "This is the real world, sweetheart. This is what happens to pretty little girls who think they can make it in Hollywood on talent alone. Every woman in these photographs thought she was special, thought she was different, thought she could outsmart the system." He turned back to Maria, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. Just like you thought you were so clever, infiltrating my operation. Did you really believe a wetback cleaning lady could bring down Jonathan Whitmore? Stop calling me that, Maria said quietly, her fear transforming into something harder, more focused. My name is Maria Elena Santos. Your name, Whitmore snarled, is whatever I decide it is. Just like your sister-in-law Elena Rodriguez learned. Oh yes, I know all about Detective Rodriguez's little missing sister. Would you like to see her? She's quite broken now, but still functional. Still earning her keep. The casual cruelty of his words hit Maria like a physical blow, but also crystallized something inside her, a cold, calculating rage that her brother would have recognized. This was why Carlos had died. This was the monster he'd been trying to expose. You're right, she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. I'm just a cleaning lady. Invisible. Forgettable. The kind of person you never notice. She pulled out her phone, holding it up so he could see the screen. The kind of person who's been live streaming this entire conversation to 10,000 viewers and the FBI field office in Los Angeles. Whitmore's face went white. That's impossible. The room is shielded, your surveillance equipment is shielded, Maria corrected. Mine isn't. Say hello to the internet, Senor Whitmore. You're famous now. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder by the second. What detail caught your attention the most so far? Was it the systematic surveillance, the connection to Detective Rodriguez's missing sister, or Maria's revelation that she's been live streaming? Drop a comment below and let me know what made you the most angry about Whitmore's operation. The sirens grew louder, their wailing chorus echoing off the marble walls like the approaching storm of justice Whitmore had never believed would reach his Beverly Hills fortress. Through the barred windows of the archive room, the flash of red and blue lights painted the walls in alternating patterns of judgment and retribution. Whitmore's face had transformed from predatory confidence to pale panic in the span of seconds. His hands shook as he grabbed for Maria's phone, but she'd already slipped it back into her pocket, the live stream continuing to broadcast his desperate attempts at damage control to thousands of viewers whose comments were already flooding social media with outrage and demands for justice. You have no idea what you've done, Whitmore snarled, his composure cracking like a mask under pressure. Do you know who I represent? Do you know how connected I am? I own judges, prosecutors, half the LAPD brass. Actually, you don't. Detective Carmen Rodriguez's voice cut through his tirade like a blade as she appeared in the doorway, her service weapon drawn and pointed directly at Whitmore's chest. Behind her, a phalanx of federal agents and FBI windbreakers flooded into the hallway, their tactical gear and grim expressions announcing that this was no longer a local investigation. Special Agent Sarah Chen stepped forward, her credentials case open and gleaming under the harsh lighting. Jonathan Whitmore, you're under arrest for federal charges of human trafficking, kidnapping, sexual exploitation, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Her voice was crisp, professional, carrying the weight of federal authority that no amount of local corruption could touch. The three young women from the Mercedes pressed themselves against the filing cabinets, their eyes wide with shock and dawning understanding. The blonde who'd spoken earlier was staring at the wall of photographs with growing horror, recognizing faces she'd met at casting calls and acting workshops, friends who'd disappeared into what everyone assumed was just the typical churn of Hollywood dreams deferred. This isn't legal, Whitmore blustered, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. You can't just storm into a private residence without a warrant. Actually, we can. Agent Chen pulled out a thick document folder, the pages crisp with official seals and judicial signatures. We have federal warrants for this property, your offices, your offshore accounts, and 3 other locations currently being raided simultaneously. She glanced at Maria with professional respect. Your cleaning lady provided us with quite a comprehensive intelligence package. Detective Rodriguez moved to Maria's side, her expression mixing relief and professional admiration. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Maria's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb. The filing cabinet marked Rodriguez. Elena, your sister is alive. The file shows recent photos, transaction records. She's being held somewhere called the Malibu facility. Rodriguez's composure cracked for just a moment, 10 years of grief and guilt flashing across her face before the professional mask snapped back into place. Agent Chen, we need immediate units to the Malibu location. Already in motion, Chen confirmed, speaking rapidly into her radio. Alpha Team, this is Control. Proceed to coordinates Malibu 7. High priority extraction, multiple potential victims. Weapons free if resistance encountered. Whitmore's security men had already been disarmed and cuffed by the federal team, their weapons confiscated and bagged as evidence. But it was Whitmore himself who commanded attention as the full weight of his situation began to penetrate his shock. You don't understand, he said, his voice taking on a desperate, wheedling tone. I'm a legitimate businessman. I run a talent agency. These women came to me voluntarily. Agent Chen's voice could have frozen helium. Is that what you call drugging 19-year-old aspiring actresses and selling them to wealthy predators? She gestured toward the wall of surveillance photos. What about the systematic stalking documented in these images? The financial records showing cryptocurrency payments for human beings? That's taken out of context, Mr. Whitmore. Rodriguez stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the lights. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you exercise that right, because every word coming out of your mouth is being recorded and will be used against you in federal court. But Whitmore's arrogance was too deeply ingrained for silence. Even faced with overwhelming evidence and federal authority, his sense of entitlement demanded recognition, demanded the deference he believed his wealth and status had earned him. You people don't understand how this business works, he continued, his voice rising with indignation. These girls come here with nothing, no talent, no connections, no realistic prospects. I give them opportunities. I provide services. The word exploded from Maria with volcanic fury. You call rape services? You call selling human beings like cattle opportunities? She pulled out the file folder containing Elena Rodriguez's documentation, her hands steady now with righteous anger. This woman was a university professor. She had a PhD in literature. What service did you provide her when you destroyed her life? The room fell silent except for the continuing chatter of radio communications as federal agents systematically documented the archive room's contents. Each photograph was being catalogued, each file folder sealed as evidence, each hard drive and computer prepared for forensic analysis that would unravel years of systematic exploitation. Agent Chen approached the computer setup, her expression growing grimmer as she scanned the multiple monitors still displaying the auction interface. Jesus Christ! He was running this like a retail operation. She turned to address the federal tech specialist who'd entered behind the tactical team. Martinez, I need every byte of data from these systems. Recovery protocols, client communications, financial transactions, everything. Already on it, Agent Chen. Martinez was connecting specialized equipment to Whitmore's computers, his fingers flying over portable keyboards as he began the process of extracting evidence that would likely incriminate dozens of wealthy and powerful individuals. The encryption is sophisticated, but not federal grade. Give me 2 hours and I'll have client lists, payment histories, delivery schedules, the whole network. Whitmore watched this systematic dismantling of his operation with growing desperation, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his shock. Wait. Wait. I can make a deal. I have information about bigger operations, international networks. Names you'd never believe, politicians, celebrities, business leaders. I can give you everything. Save it for your lawyer, Rodriguez said coldly. And pray that the U.S. Attorney's office finds your cooperation more valuable than putting you away for life. The federal agents were working with military precision, photographing every inch of the room, cataloging evidence according to protocols designed to ensure nothing could be challenged in court. But it was the human cost that dominated the atmosphere. The wall of surveillance photos representing hundreds of women whose lives had been commodified, packaged, and sold by a man who saw vulnerability as a market opportunity. One of the rescued women, a Latina girl who couldn't have been older than 20, was staring at a particular section of photographs with growing recognition. Oh my God! That's Carmen Delgado. She disappeared 6 months ago. Everyone thought she'd just gone home to Phoenix. Her voice broke with the weight of understanding. She's been here this whole time. Agent Chen's expression softened slightly as she addressed the 3 women. We have victim services coordinators on their way. Medical personnel, counselors, legal advocates, everyone you'll need to begin recovery from this. But right now, I need you to understand that you're safe. This man will never hurt you or anyone else again. What about the others? The blonde asked, gesturing toward the photographs. All these other women, are they still? We're going to find them, Rodriguez promised, her voice carrying the weight of personal commitment. Every single one of them. Tonight's raid is just the beginning. We have locations across 3 states, financial records spanning 5 years, and enough evidence to dismantle the entire network. Whitmore let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. You have no idea how big this is. How many people are involved? How much money changes hands? His eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction despite his dire circumstances. You think arresting me stops anything? I'm one small piece of a machine that spans continents. Cut off one head, and 3 more take its place. Maybe, Agent Chen acknowledged. But we're not just cutting off one head. We're poisoning the entire organism. She held up a hard drive that Martinez had just extracted from Whitmore's main computer. Your obsession with documentation just provided us with a complete roadmap to every client, every facilitator, every safe house in the network. By morning, we'll have federal teams simultaneously raiding locations in 12 states and 4 countries. The full implications of his meticulous record-keeping began to dawn on Whitmore's face. His compulsion to document every transaction, every victim, every degrading moment, the very obsession that had fed his need for control, had become the instrument of his destruction and the salvation of hundreds of victims. You can't use any of that, he said desperately. It was obtained illegally, without a proper warrant. Actually, Maria interrupted, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction, everything in this room was documented by your own surveillance system. I just helped the FBI understand what they were looking at. She gestured toward the hidden cameras that Whitmore himself had installed. Ironic, isn't it? Your paranoid need to record everything is what's going to put you away forever. Outside, more vehicles were arriving, victim services vans, federal crime scene units, media trucks drawn by the live stream that had alerted the world to the unfolding raid. The story was already breaking on social media, with #ForbiddenRoom trending worldwide as viewers shared Maria's broadcast and demanded justice for the victims whose faces they'd seen in real time. The trap that had taken months to set was finally springing closed, and Jonathan Whitmore was about to discover that the justice system, when properly motivated and armed with overwhelming evidence, could be every bit as relentless as the predators it was designed to stop. Like this video if you want to see justice served, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of karma in action. The next chapter reveals exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. The conference room at the FBI's Los Angeles field office buzzed with the controlled chaos of a major investigation reaching critical mass. Multiple screens displayed evidence seized from Whitmore's archive room, each monitor revealing another layer of systematic exploitation that stretched far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Agent Chen stood at the head of the conference table, her expression grim as she prepared to present what her team had uncovered in just 6 hours of digital forensics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Chen began, addressing the assembled task force of federal agents, local detectives, and victim services coordinators, what we initially believed was a local trafficking operation has revealed itself to be a sophisticated international network with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of entertainment, politics, and business. Detective Rodriguez sat beside Maria at the polished conference table, both women wearing the hollow-eyed exhaustion of people who had seen too much human suffering in too short a time. But underneath the fatigue burned a fierce determination. They had opened Pandora's box, and now they were committed to pursuing every demon that escaped. Special Agent Martinez clicked a remote, and the main screen filled with a comprehensive flowchart that looked like a corporate organizational structure from hell. Whitmore's operation was divided into 3 primary divisions, he explained. Acquisition, processing, and distribution. Each division operated with military-level compartmentalization, ensuring that no single arrest could bring down the entire network. Acquisition targeted specific demographics, Agent Chen continued. Aspiring actresses and models, obviously, but also undocumented immigrants, runaway teenagers, women fleeing domestic violence, anyone whose disappearance wouldn't immediately trigger widespread searches or media attention. Her laser pointer highlighted a section of the chart labeled recruitment protocols. They used legitimate-seeming talent agencies, modeling scouts, and even fake immigration attorneys to identify and isolate potential victims. Maria's hands clenched as she recognized the pattern. Her own recruitment had followed this exact template, a vulnerable woman desperate for work, isolated by immigration status, perfect prey for a predator who specialized in exploiting legal invisibility. Processing occurred at multiple facilities, Martinez added, advancing to the next slide. The Beverly Hills mansion was just the headquarters. We've identified 17 additional properties across California, Nevada, and Arizona, all registered under shell companies that trace back to Whitmore's offshore accounts. Photos of various houses appeared on screen, luxury estates in Malibu, converted warehouses in industrial districts, even a renovated private school in the Mojave Desert that served as a training facility. Training for what? One of the victim services coordinators asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Compliance, Agent Chen said simply. Systematic psychological breaking designed to eliminate resistance and create dependency. Sleep deprivation, isolation, controlled feeding, sexual assault, and constant surveillance. The documentation is extensive. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the clinical precision with which human dignity had been systematically destroyed. These weren't crimes of passion or opportunity, they were industrial-scale operations designed to transform human beings into commodities. The distribution network is where it gets really ugly, Martinez continued. Whitmore maintained detailed client profiles, including preferences, payment histories, and what he termed damage tolerance levels. More photos appeared: private jets, luxury yachts, exclusive resorts. Clients ranged from Hollywood executives and tech billionaires to foreign dignitaries and organized crime figures. The cryptocurrency transactions alone total over $40 million in the past 2 years. Rodriguez leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled fury. "What about Elena? My sister, do we know where she is?" Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. "The Malibu raid was successful. We recovered 12 women from that facility, including Elena Rodriguez. She's alive, detective. She's hurt, but she's alive." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's been moved to a secure medical facility where she can receive specialized trauma care. The psychological damage is significant. But the preliminary medical evaluation suggests she can recover with proper treatment." The room erupted in quiet celebrations and expressions of relief, but Rodriguez simply closed her eyes and nodded, 10 years of anguish finally beginning to transform into hope. However, Agent Chen continued, her tone becoming sharper. Elena's rescue revealed something else. Whitmore wasn't lying when he claimed this network extends far beyond his operation. She was scheduled for transfer to what they call a Level 5 client, someone with enough money and influence to make victims disappear permanently. The screen changed to display a series of encrypted communications between Whitmore and various clients. Even with names redacted, the casual discussion of human trafficking read like a business correspondence about livestock purchases. "The Stanford graduate has shown excellent training response," Agent Chen read from one message. "Recommend immediate escalation to permanent acquisition. Client preference for educated assets makes her ideal for the Singapore placement." She looked around the room. Elena Rodriguez has a PhD in comparative literature. She was being marketed specifically because of her education level. Maria felt sick. The systematic nature of the exploitation, the way these monsters had turned human accomplishment into selling points, represented a level of evil that defied comprehension. "What about the live stream?" Rodriguez asked. Maria's broadcast reached thousands of viewers. "How much evidence did that provide?" Martinez smiled grimly. "More than you'd believe. Not only did we capture Whitmore's confession in real time, but the viewer engagement created a digital paper trail that's invaluable for prosecution. Comments, shares, screenshots, social media turned into a crowdsourced evidence collection system." He clicked to another slide showing social media analytics. "The hashtag Forbidden Room has been shared over 2 million times in 8 hours. We're receiving tips from across the country, people recognizing faces from the broadcast, reporting suspicious activities, even former clients panicking and trying to cover their tracks. Which brings us to the current situation," Agent Chen said, her tone becoming businesslike. "We have simultaneous raids planned for tonight across 12 locations. But this operation's success depends on absolute secrecy until the moment we move. Whitmore's network includes people with access to law enforcement communications, judicial proceedings, even federal databases." She gestured toward Maria. "Ms. Santos, your infiltration provided the initial intelligence, but your live stream has created a unique situation. The evidence is already public, which means it can't be suppressed or disappeared through normal corruption channels. The court of public opinion is now watching every move we make." Maria nodded, understanding the implications. By broadcasting the evidence in real time, she'd created a form of insurance. Too many people had seen the truth for it to be quietly buried or plea bargained away. "There's one more thing," Martinez added, pulling up a series of financial records. Whitmore's obsession with documentation included detailed payment records for law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges who provided protection for his operation. Names began appearing on screen, each one representing another domino in a system of corruption that stretched across multiple jurisdictions. Judge Harrison from LA's Superior Court, Rodriguez read aloud, her voice filled with disgust. He's presided over dozens of cases involving missing persons and human trafficking. No wonder so many investigations went nowhere. Detective Morrison from Beverly Hills PD, Agent Chin continued. He was the primary contact for security consultations regarding Whitmore's properties. $300,000 in cryptocurrency payments over 2 years. The list continued, a comprehensive catalog of institutional corruption that had allowed Whitmore's operation to flourish for nearly a decade. Each name represented not just personal betrayal of public trust, but dozens of victims whose cases had been deliberately mishandled or ignored. The good news, Agent Chen concluded, is that Whitmore's compulsive record-keeping has given us everything we need to clean house. The bad news is that dismantling this level of corruption while maintaining operational security is challenging. What do you need from me? Maria asked. She'd come too far and sacrificed too much to let procedural complications derail justice now. Right now? Nothing. Your part in this operation is officially over. Agent Chen's expression mixed admiration with concern. You've provided invaluable service to federal law enforcement, and that will be documented in your immigration proceedings. Detective Rodriguez has already submitted recommendations that should fast-track your path to legal residency. But Maria shook her head. This isn't over. Whitmore mentioned international connections, clients in other countries. What about them? That's where things get complicated, Martinez admitted. We can pursue U.S. citizens who participated in this network, but clients in non-extradition countries. He shrugged helplessly. Some of these monsters may never face justice. Maybe not legal justice, Maria said quietly. But they can face public justice. The kind of exposure that destroys reputations, business relationships, political careers. She gestured toward her phone, still receiving notifications from her ongoing live stream. The internet has a very long memory, and very little tolerance for people who buy and sell human beings. Detective Rodriguez smiled grimly. Spoken like a true journalist's sister. As the task force meeting continued, Maria sat back and absorbed the full scope of what they'd uncovered. The Forbidden Room had been more than just an archive of exploitation, it had been a roadmap to an entire shadow economy built on human suffering. But it had also been Whitmore's fatal mistake, his arrogant assumption that his documentation would never be turned against him. Now that documentation was spreading across the internet like wildfire, immune to corruption or suppression, creating a permanent record of crimes that would haunt every perpetrator for the rest of their lives. The evidence drop was complete. The dominoes were beginning to fall. And tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. The perp walk began at exactly 6:47 a.m., timed perfectly for the morning news cycle that would carry Jonathan Whitmore's image across every major media outlet in the country. Maria watched from the steps of the federal courthouse as the man who had terrorized countless women was led through a gauntlet of reporters, photographers, and angry protesters who had gathered since dawn. Gone was the expensive suit and predatory confidence. Whitmore shuffled forward in standard Orange County Jail coveralls, his hands cuffed behind his back, his once perfect hair disheveled and greasy. The harsh morning sunlight revealed every line of exhaustion and defeat on his face as federal marshals guided him toward the courthouse entrance. "How does it feel, Whitmore?" shouted a reporter from Channel 7. How does it feel to be exposed? Did you really think you could traffic human beings forever? Called another. But it was the voice of Sarah Chen, one of the women rescued from the Malibu facility, that cut through the chaos like a blade. She stood at the front of the crowd, her voice strong despite the obvious trauma etched in her features. "Look at me, Jonathan," she commanded, her words carrying across the courthouse steps. "Look at me." Whitmore's head turned involuntarily, his eyes meeting hers for one brief moment before he tried to look away. But Sarah pressed forward, flanked by victim advocates and supported by the growing crowd of survivors who had found the courage to come forward. "I want you to see my face," Sarah continued, her voice rising with each word. "I want you to remember that I have a name, that I had dreams, that I was a person before you tried to break me." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. "And I want you to know that I'm still here. We're all still here. And we're going to make sure the whole world knows what you are." The crowd erupted in applause and shouts of support. Signs reading "Justice for the Voiceless" and "Invisible No More" bobbed above the sea of faces, survivors, family members, advocates, and ordinary citizens united in their demand for accountability. Whitmore's legal team tried to hustle him past the crowd more quickly, but the federal marshals maintained their steady pace, ensuring that every camera captured every moment of his public degradation. There would be no hiding, no private transfers, no protection from the consequences of his choices. "Mr. Whitmore." A reporter from CNN managed to get close enough to be heard clearly. "Sources say you've offered to cooperate with federal investigators. What can you tell us about the scope of this trafficking network?" For a moment, Whitmore's old arrogance flickered to the surface. He slowed his shuffle and turned toward the reporter, his mouth opening as if to deliver one of his characteristic dismissive responses. But the words never came. Instead, his gaze swept across the crowd of survivors and their supporters, all of them staring at him with expressions ranging from contempt to pity. The reality of his situation, the complete collapse of his power, his reputation, his carefully constructed empire, finally penetrated his shock. His shoulders sagged, his head dropped, and he resumed his defeated shuffle toward the courthouse doors. "That's what justice looks like," Detective Rodriguez murmured to Maria as they watched from the courthouse steps. A man who spent his life making others feel powerless, finally understanding what powerlessness really means. Inside the courthouse, the scene was equally devastating for Whitmore's remaining sense of self-importance. Federal prosecutors had assembled a case so comprehensive, so thoroughly documented, that even his expensive legal team was advising immediate cooperation rather than attempting a defense. "Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Wong addressed Federal Judge Michael Harrison, the government seeks remand without bail for the defendant. Mr. Whitmore represents an extreme flight risk, given his access to international networks and offshore financial resources. Moreover, the evidence suggests ongoing threats to witness safety." Whitmore's attorney, Marcus Goldstein, a criminal defense specialist whose client list read like a who's who of white-collar criminals, made a half-hearted argument for house arrest with electronic monitoring. But even he seemed to understand the futility of the request. "Your Honor, my client has deep roots in the Los Angeles community. He's never been convicted of any crime, and he's prepared to cooperate fully with federal investigators, Mr. Goldstein," Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying decades of judicial authority. "I've spent the morning reviewing the evidence presented by federal prosecutors. The scope and systematic nature of these alleged crimes defies description." He gestured toward the thick files stacked on his bench. "We're not talking about a single incident of poor judgment. We're talking about an industrial-scale operation that allegedly transformed human trafficking into a profitable business model. The judge's gaze settled on Whitmore with unmistakable contempt. The court finds that the defendant poses an extreme danger to the community and an unacceptable flight risk. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial. The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, finalizing Whitmore's fall from Beverly Hills mansion to federal detention cell. As the marshals approached to escort him away, Maria watched his face cycle through the final stages of his psychological collapse. But the courtroom drama was only the beginning. Outside, Special Agent Chen was addressing a growing crowd of media representatives, laying out the scope of an investigation that was already reverberating across multiple industries and international borders. Operation Forbidden Room has resulted in the arrest of 47 individuals across 12 states, Agent Chen announced, reading from prepared remarks. We've rescued 83 victims from various facilities, with more rescues ongoing as we speak. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. This investigation represents the largest human trafficking prosecution in federal history. The questions came rapid fire from the assembled reporters. Agent Chen, can you confirm reports that several Hollywood executives are among those arrested? What about the allegations of judicial corruption in Los Angeles? Is it true that this network had international connections? Agent Chen handled each question with professional precision, revealing just enough information to satisfy public interest while protecting the ongoing investigation. But it was her final statement that captured the true significance of the moment. This case began with one woman who refused to be invisible, Agent Chen said, her eyes finding Maria in the crowd. Maria Santos could have stayed silent, could have protected herself by ignoring what she discovered. Instead, she chose to risk everything to expose a system that treated human beings as merchandise. The agent's voice carried genuine emotion now. Her courage didn't just bring down one predator, it illuminated an entire network of exploitation that had operated in the shadows for years. The crowd turned toward Maria, cameras focusing on a woman who had entered Whitmore's world as invisible domestic help and emerged as the architect of his destruction. She stood quietly beside Detective Rodriguez, still wearing the simple work clothes that had made her forgettable to predators but unforgettable to history. Ms. Santos, called a reporter from the Los Angeles Times, what would you say to other undocumented workers who might be afraid to report crimes because of their immigration status? Maria considered the question carefully, thinking of all the women still trapped in systems like Whitmore's, paralyzed by fear and legal vulnerability. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced the worst of humanity and emerged victorious. I would say that our invisibility can be our power, she replied. They see us as disposable, as powerless, as people who don't matter. But we see everything. We know everything. And when we choose to speak, the whole world listens. Her words rippled through the crowd and across social media, where the hashtag #InvisibleNoMore was already trending alongside hashtag Forbidden Room. The live stream that had started in Whitmore's archive room continued to generate waves of exposure, with new victims coming forward every hour and new evidence surfacing as investigators followed digital trails across continents. By evening, the dominoes were falling across multiple industries. Studio executives were resigning to spend time with family. Political candidates were withdrawing from races due to personal reasons. International business deals were being cancelled as corporate boards distanced themselves from anyone connected to Whitmore's network. But perhaps most satisfying was the scene playing out in federal detention, where Jonathan Whitmore sat in a small cell designed for people who posed extreme risks to society. The man who had controlled every aspect of countless women's lives now had every aspect of his own life controlled by federal marshals. The man who had documented others' degradation for his own gratification was now having his own degradation documented by federal investigators building their case. The fall was complete, total, and irreversible. The predator had become prey, the hunter had become hunted, and the invisible woman who had cleaned his house had cleaned his clock in front of the entire world. Tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding broken lives would begin. But tonight, justice wore the face of a small woman with cleaning chemicals under her fingernails and fire in her eyes, proving that sometimes the most powerful people in the world are the ones everyone else refuses to see. 6 months later, the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Los Angeles field office had transformed into something resembling a war room crossed with a victim services center. Maps covered every wall, marked with colored pins representing rescued victims, dismantled facilities, and ongoing investigations that stretched from Los Angeles to Singapore. Maria sat at the polished conference table, no longer the invisible cleaning woman but now officially designated as a federal consultant on human trafficking operations. The Zurich accounts have been frozen, reported Agent Martinez, his fingers dancing across a laptop keyboard as he coordinated with international law enforcement agencies. Swiss banking authorities are cooperating fully, apparently. Even numbered accounts lose their protection when they're funding child trafficking. Detective Rodriguez nodded from her position at the head of the table, her new role as task force coordinator evident in the organized chaos surrounding her. Elena's rescue had reinvigorated her career, transforming personal trauma into professional mission with laser-focused intensity. "What's the status on the Singapore operation?" Rodriguez asked. 17 arrests yesterday, Agent Chen reported from a video conference screen, her image transmitted from the FBI's International Coordination Center. The Level 5 clients Whitmore mentioned included a tech billionaire, 2 cabinet ministers, and the owner of a major shipping conglomerate. Singapore authorities are being very cooperative. Apparently, human trafficking is bad for their international business reputation. Maria reviewed the thick folder in front of her, each page representing another victim identified through Whitmore's obsessive documentation. The photographs that had once served as a catalogue of exploitation had become a roadmap to liberation, helping investigators track down trafficking networks across 6 countries. "Elena wants to testify," Rodriguez announced quietly. "The doctors say she's stable enough for a victim impact statement at Whitmore's sentencing hearing next month." The room fell silent. Elena Rodriguez's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, but the psychological scars from 5 years of systematic abuse would never fully heal. Her decision to face her tormentor in open court represented both tremendous courage and tremendous risk. "Are you sure she's ready for that?" asked Dr. Patricia Delgado, the trauma specialist who'd been working with recovered victims since the initial raids. Confronting her abuser in a public forum could trigger serious psychological setbacks. "She says she needs to reclaim her voice," Rodriguez replied. "And honestly, after everything she's been through, I think she's earned the right to be heard." Maria understood completely. The decision to break silence, to transform from victim to survivor to advocate, required a kind of courage that couldn't be measured or prescribed. Elena's choice echoed Maria's own moment of decision in Whitmore's archive room, the moment when survival became insufficient, when silence became complicity. "What about the congressional hearings?" asked Agent Martinez. "Are we prepared for that circus?" The congressional investigation into federal law enforcement's failure to detect Whitmore's network had become a media spectacle, with various politicians competing to express the most outrage while carefully avoiding mention of their own connections to the exposed corruption. 3 federal judges, 12 prosecutors, and 47 law enforcement officials had been suspended pending investigation, creating a crisis of confidence that reached the highest levels of government. "Let them posture," Rodriguez said dismissively. We've got the evidence, we've got the convictions, and we've got 83 rescued victims who are alive because of this investigation. The politicians can worry about their approval ratings. Speaking of convictions, Agent Chen's voice crackled through the video conference. The Hollywood trials start next month. 7 studio executives, 4 talent agents, and 2 network presidents. The entertainment industry is about to get very uncomfortable. Maria smiled grimly at that news. The entertainment industry's complicity in Whitmore's operation had been perhaps the most shocking revelation of the investigation. Major studios had used his talent pipeline to source actresses for projects where compliance was more important than ability. Award shows and industry events had served as showcases where victims were displayed for potential clients. Even charity organizations focused on women's rights had been infiltrated and used to identify vulnerable targets. The Victim Compensation Fund is fully operational now, Dr. Delgado reported. Between the seized assets, criminal forfeitures, and civil settlements, we're looking at approximately $200 million available for victim services. It's not enough to undo the damage, but it's a start. $200 million, a number that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago when Maria was scrubbing Whitmore's floors for minimum wage. But money couldn't restore innocence, couldn't erase trauma, couldn't bring back the years stolen from each victim. The real compensation would come from ensuring that this network of exploitation could never reassemble. What about the international clients? Maria asked. The ones in non-extradition countries? Agent Chen's smile was predatory. That's where your brother's journalistic training comes in handy. We can't prosecute them, but we can sure as hell expose them. The leaked client lists have already destroyed 3 governments, collapsed 2 major corporations, and triggered investigations in 14 countries. Turns out the court of public opinion has a very long reach. The leaked client lists have been Maria's idea, a carefully orchestrated information warfare campaign that treated sunlight as the best disinfectant. Names, financial records, and communication transcripts have been strategically released to international media organizations, creating a cascade of exposure that no amount of money or influence could suppress. How many convictions total? Rodriguez asked. Martinez consulted his spreadsheet. 147 federal convictions so far, with another 60 cases pending trial. State charges bring the total to over 300 arrests. Average sentence for trafficking-related charges is running about 25 years federal time. And Whitmore? Life without parole, plus consecutive sentences totaling 470 years. Even if he appeals successfully, he'll die in federal prison. Agent Chen's satisfaction was audible even through the video link. His own documentation was so comprehensive that the defense couldn't challenge a single charge. 57 counts of human trafficking, 34 counts of kidnapping, 89 counts of sexual assault, and conspiracy charges that linked him to murders in 3 states. The numbers were staggering, but Maria knew they represented only a fraction of the actual damage Whitmore had caused over nearly a decade of operation. How many women had disappeared without trace? How many families had spent years wondering what happened to daughters, sisters, mothers who'd simply vanished into the machinery of exploitation? There's something else, Dr. Delgado said quietly. The psychological profiles of the victims reveal a pattern that extends beyond this specific network. We're seeing indicators that similar operations exist in other major cities, Miami, New York, Chicago. The methodology is too sophisticated, too systematic to be unique to Whitmore. The room absorbed this sobering assessment in silence. They dismantled one hydra, only to discover that others likely existed, learning from Whitmore's mistakes and adapting their methods to avoid the documentary obsessions that had led to his downfall. So what do we do? Maria asked. How do we find the other networks? The same way we found this one, Rodriguez replied. We listen to the invisible people. We pay attention to the stories that powerful people want to ignore. She gestured toward the wall of rescued victim photographs. Every one of these women tried to tell someone what was happening to her. The system failed them, but the truth was always there for anyone willing to hear it. Maria nodded, understanding the deeper implication. The real cleanup wasn't just about prosecuting criminals or rescuing victims, it was about fundamentally changing how society valued and protected its most vulnerable members. It was about making invisibility a choice rather than an imposed condition. I want to expand the consulting program, she announced. Train more domestic workers, service industry employees, people who are genuinely invisible in wealthy environments. Create a network of observers who can identify exploitation before it becomes entrenched. A surveillance network of the surveilled, Agent Chen mused approvingly. I like it. Turn the predator's own methods against them. Exactly. Maria's eyes held the same determined fire that had carried her through Whitmore's archive room 6 months earlier. They think they're hunting. They have no idea they're the ones being watched. The meeting continued for another hour, covering operational details and coordination protocols for the expanding investigation. But the real work, the patient, dangerous task of infiltrating other networks, would happen in shadows and silence, carried out by people whose greatest strength was their supposed weakness. As Maria left the federal building that evening, she thought about Sophia, now enrolled in a good school with her custody secure and her future bright. Thought about Elena Rodriguez, slowly reclaiming her life one day at a time. Thought about the 83 women who were learning to live without fear for the first time in years. The cleanup was far from over. Predators still prowled in the shadows, seeking vulnerability to exploit and innocence to corrupt. But now they were being watched by an army of the invisible, their every move catalogued by people they'd trained themselves not to see. The forbidden room had been opened. The light had flooded in. And in that light, monsters had nowhere left to hide. 2 years later the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the University of Southern California's journalism building as Professor Maria Santos arranged her notes for the day's lecture. The classroom slowly filled with eager students, their faces bright with the ambition and idealism that she remembered from her own university days in Guadalajara, before violence and loss had forced her into the shadows of American society. Today we're discussing investigative journalism in the digital age, Maria announced, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had lived the principles she taught. Specifically, how social media and live streaming technology have democratized the exposure of institutional corruption. A student in the front row raised her hand. Professor Santos, is it true that you brought down an entire trafficking network using just a smartphone? Maria smiled, the question no longer painful but transformed into something resembling pride. I had help. A lot of help. But yes, technology played a crucial role in ensuring that evidence couldn't be suppressed or manipulated by corrupt officials. The classroom fell silent as students absorbed the reality that their professor wasn't just teaching theory, she was sharing lived experience that had reshaped federal law enforcement and international anti-trafficking efforts. The key insight, Maria continued, is that power structures depend on controlling information. They survive by determining what gets seen, what gets reported, and what gets believed. But when ordinary people can broadcast truth directly to the world. She gestured toward their phones and laptops. Those power structures become incredibly fragile. After class, Maria walked across campus to her other responsibility, the Santos Center for Invisible Voices, a research institute and advocacy organization she'd founded with the victim compensation funds from Whitmore's seized assets. The building hummed with activity as researchers, trauma counselors, and technology specialists worked on expanding the network of surveillance and support that had grown out of the original investigation. Professor Santos, called Dr. Patricia Delgado from her office doorway. Elena Rodriguez is here for her monthly update. Elena Rodriguez sat in the center's comfortable conference room, her transformation over 2 years nothing short of remarkable. The hollow-eyed victim rescued from Whitmore's Malibu facility had evolved into a poised advocate whose testimony before Congress had led to sweeping reforms in federal anti-trafficking legislation. How are the new protocols working out? Elena asked, reviewing reports from the center's field coordinators across 12 major cities. Better than we hoped, Maria replied, pulling up real-time data on wall-mounted monitors. The Invisible Network has identified 47 potential trafficking operations in the past 18 months. Federal authorities have conducted successful raids on 31 of those locations, rescuing over 200 victims. The Invisible Network represented the evolution of Maria's original concept, a coordinated system of domestic workers, service industry employees, and other functionally invisible people who receive training in recognizing exploitation patterns and secure methods of reporting suspicious activities. Each participant carried encrypted communication devices disguised as common electronics, allowing real-time coordination with federal task forces. What about international expansion? Elena asked. Phase 2 launches next month, Maria confirmed. We have partnerships established with labor organizations in 15 countries. The basic principle remains the same, predators rely on invisibility, so we make the invisible visible. Detective Rodriguez entered the conference room, her captain's insignia gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her promotion to head of the LAPD's new anti-trafficking task force had come with increased resources and federal coordination authority that made her one of the most effective law enforcement officials in the country. Ladies, I have good news and complicated news, Rodriguez announced, settling into a chair with the weary satisfaction of someone who'd spent the morning coordinating multiple simultaneous operations. Give us the good news first, Elena said. The Miami network is finished. 17 arrests yesterday, including 2 federal judges and a state attorney general. They were using the same documentation obsession as Whitmore, so the evidence was overwhelming. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Apparently, predators can't help but document their power over others. It's like a psychological compulsion. Maria nodded, unsurprised. The pattern had repeated in every major network they'd uncovered, the same arrogant need to record and catalog exploitation that ultimately provided prosecutors with unshakable evidence of systematic abuse. And the complicated news? The Chicago network is different. Much more sophisticated. No centralized documentation, strictly compartmentalized operations, and they seem to have learned from Whitmore's mistakes. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet, displaying intelligence reports that painted a picture of evolved criminal enterprise. They're specifically targeting our invisible network participants, trying to identify and eliminate the people who might expose them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The success of their surveillance network had triggered an adaptation by criminal organizations, predators learning to hunt the hunters, identifying and neutralizing the witnesses who might expose their operations. How many of our people are at risk? Maria asked. Potentially dozens. They're using counter-surveillance techniques, background checks on domestic workers, even polygraph examinations disguised as employment screening. Rodriguez's expression was grim. We may have pushed them toward more sophisticated operational security. Elena leaned forward, her academic background in literature providing unexpected insight into human behavior patterns. "That's actually encouraging," she said quietly. "Encouraging?" Maria's voice held disbelief. "Think about it from their perspective," Elena continued. 2 years ago, they operated with complete impunity because they believed domestic workers were invisible, powerless, irrelevant. Now they're spending significant resources trying to identify and counteract those same people. Her smile was cold and satisfied. "We've forced them to acknowledge that we exist, that we matter, that we're a threat to their operations." Maria absorbed this perspective, recognizing the truth in Elena's analysis. The criminal organization's adaptation represented a form of victory. They could no longer afford to ignore the people they'd once dismissed as inconsequential. "What do you need from the center?" Maria asked Rodriguez. "Enhanced security protocols for our field coordinators. Better encryption, more sophisticated communication methods, and emergency extraction procedures for anyone who gets compromised." Rodriguez paused, studying Maria's face. "And I need you to consider stepping back from direct operations. You've become too visible, too recognizable. Your face has been on every major news program in the country." Maria considered this reluctantly. Her public profile, the university position, the congressional testimony, the media interviews, had been necessary for legitimizing the anti-trafficking movement and securing funding for expanded operations. But visibility came with vulnerability, especially when dealing with organizations that had demonstrated their willingness to kill witnesses. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "We've received credible intelligence that associates of Whitmore's network have put a contract out on you. $2 million for what they're calling permanent problem resolution." The death threat hung in the air like poison gas, transforming the comfortable conference room into a reminder that their war against systematic exploitation carried deadly consequences. But Maria found herself surprised by her own reaction, not fear, but anger that these monsters believed they could silence truth through violence. "Let them try," she said quietly. "I spent 3 years cleaning their houses, washing their clothes, listening to their casual discussions of buying and selling human beings. I know how they think, how they operate, how they justify their crimes to themselves." Her voice hardened with determination. "They're afraid of us now. They're spending millions trying to stop us. That means we're winning." Elena reached across the table and grasped Maria's hand. "Carlos would be proud of you. The journalist who died trying to expose these networks, his work is finally being completed by his sister." The mention of Carlos sent a familiar pang through Maria's chest, but it was accompanied now by something that had taken 2 years to develop: peace. Her brother's death had planted the seeds of justice that were now bearing fruit across multiple continents, dismantling networks of exploitation that had operated in shadows for decades. "What about Sofia?" Rodriguez asked gently. "How does she feel about the increased security?" Maria's expression softened at the mention of her daughter, now 10 years old and thriving in a private school funded by victim compensation settlements. "She understands that some people do bad things to others, and that her mom works to stop them. She's proud of what we've accomplished, but—" Maria paused, considering how to articulate the complexity of raising a child while fighting monsters. She also knows that helping other people sometimes means taking risks. And she's okay with that because she's seen what happens when good people stay silent. The conversation continued for another hour, covering operational details, security protocols, and coordination with international partners. But as the meeting concluded, Maria found herself reflecting on the journey from Whitmore's archive room to this moment of institutional change and ongoing commitment. The Forbidden Room had been opened 2 years ago, flooding light into corners where predators had operated with impunity for decades. That light continued to spread, carried by an ever-growing network of people who refused to remain invisible, who transformed their supposed powerlessness into the very tool that brought down the powerful. As Maria walked back to her car through the USC campus, surrounded by discreet but professional security personnel, she thought about the students she'd taught that morning. Young people who would graduate into a world where human trafficking was no longer an invisible crime, where systematic exploitation faced coordinated resistance from the very people it sought to exploit. The verdict was clear: predators who had spent their lives treating human beings as commodities were now facing justice in courtrooms across 6 countries. Their networks were dismantled, their assets seized, their reputations destroyed by the testimony of survivors who refused to remain silent. But more importantly, the fundamental equation had changed. The invisible were now watching. The powerless had found their power. The silenced had discovered their voices. Jonathan Whitmore had died in federal prison 6 months earlier, found hanged in his cell in what officials ruled a suicide, but what Maria suspected was justice delivered by fellow inmates who had their own standards regarding crimes against women and children. His death had closed one chapter but opened another, as prosecutors used his documented methods to identify and pursue similar networks worldwide. The forbidden room was empty now, its filing cabinet seized as evidence, its walls repainted, its horrors transformed into courtroom testimony that would echo through legal precedent for generations. But the spirit of that room, the systematic documentation of human suffering for profit, lived on in the minds of survivors who had turned documentation into liberation, surveillance into salvation, invisibility into invincibility. As Maria drove home to Sofia, she smiled at the irony that had defined their victory. The predators' greatest strength, their ability to make victims invisible, had become their greatest weakness when those same invisible people chose to see, to remember, and to speak. The forbidden room had taught the world a simple truth: sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones everyone else refuses to notice. Sometimes justice wears the face of a woman with cleaning supplies under her fingernails and fire in her eyes. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against systematic evil is the testimony of those who were never supposed to have a voice. Fuck around and find out, Maria thought as she pulled into her driveway, where Sofia waited with homework questions and stories about her day. They found out exactly what happens when you mistake invisibility for powerlessness. The verdict was in. Justice had been served. And the invisible army continued its patient, relentless watch.